You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
It was funny because when we launched, the wine industry was actually talking about a lot of the things it's still talking about, but it only wanted solutions that fit into this narrow worldview of how they were already doing business. And so while I was developing like proof of concepts and still am developing proof of concepts, I still hear a lot of like, well, you're a fad. And I'm like, I've been doing this for a decade and, we haven't handed down here yet. So like, that's not a fad. Like this is here to stay. This is the future of the industry that you're looking at right here.
Welcome back to Business of Drinks. I'm Erica Ducey.
And I'm Scott Rosenbaum. And today we're talking to a founder who is rewriting the rules for what a wine brand can be. Marian Leitner-Waldman is the CEO and co-founder of Archer Roose, and she is building a standout brand that is thriving while the rest of the wine industry is having a little trouble.
Archer Roose is what a lot of traditional wine brands aren't. The product is portable, they're approachable, the brand is environmentally conscious, and it is made for modern consumers on the go. While most of the industry is flat or declining, Archer Roose has more than tripled its production since 2021. The brand has now surpassed 100,000 9-liter case equivalents, and it's on track to double again in 2025.
A big part of that growth comes from going after less than conventional on-premise channels. Think Dave & Buster's, Regal Cinemas, and Vail Resorts. An example here, right? On JetBlue alone, Archer Roose is now selling 70,000 cases a year. They are, like we always like to say, they're meeting consumers where they are, not where the industry thinks they should be.
And Marian has built this business with serious strategic chops. From partnering with Cornell University to develop a canning process that ensures a 2-year shelf life, to recruiting craft beer distributors to get wine into places that bottles can't go. It's a lesson in infrastructure innovation and format-led thinking.
Plus, she's one of the few founders in wine actively talking about real-world metrics that matter, right? Controlled pours, profit margins for operators, and shifting consumption occasions. Archer Roose's Malbec, for example, grew 86% last year, and this is in a category that has contracted.
Right. And then there's the brand. With Elizabeth Banks as co-owner and chief creative officer, they've made Archer Roose funny and witty and also premium, taking a page directly out of the Ryan Reynolds Aviation Gin playbook. And as we can see from their numbers, that brand positioning has really resonated with consumers.
So whether you're in wine or spirits or simply found yourself clicking on one of Elizabeth Banks' viral videos, this episode is packed with key takeaways on brand building, channel strategy, and long game thinking in a highly competitive space.
Here's our conversation with Marian Leitner-Waldman on building a modern wine brand that's defying gravity one can at a time. And now, a word from our sponsor. Is your drinks brand looking to start or expand import and distribution?
Whether you're seeking to enter new markets or you're unhappy with a current distributor and desiring a better fit, you should know about Swig Partners.
Founded by industry experts Eric Siegelbaum and Amy Troutmiller, Swig takes the guesswork and the legwork out of distribution strategy. Swig helps brands and distributors find the right fit for long-term relationships and sales success.
US-based importers and distributors should reach out too. With Swig, they can explore new products for free. And brands, you can get $100 off by mentioning Business of Drinks. Find out more at swigpartners.com/business of drinks. That's swigpartners.com/business of drinks.
Welcome, Marian. Thanks so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. So, okay, so let's hop right in. I want to hear about your background and tell me how you ended up running a wine company.
Oh my gosh, my story is full of so many twists and turns, and I don't really think makes a lot of sense to other people, but really makes sense to me. But in the kind of shorter version that's not going to take the whole podcast, I I really have two loves, enduring loves. One of them is wine, and the other is storytelling, and those are really two things that have just kind of shaped my whole life. I lived in Spain when I was 15 with a winemaker and his family, and actually spent my sophomore year living and studying there. And that was really what introduced me to the world of wine. And when I, was first graduated from college, I actually founded a literary magazine, and it was a print only literary magazine dedicated to millennials. The business model was terrible, but man, did we have a good time! And it really reinforced to me just how important community is. And literally, like everyone would just show up at each other's houses, with these big, bottles of wine, and just I was just constantly observing the way that like these storytellers, these people who really dedicated their whole lives, also just were so um, just were so excited about wine as a concept. And so when I ended up meeting my husband years later, who had actually like founded a winery in the Republic of Georgia, despite being an American farm boy from Appalachia, um, he ended up having to leave the country because Russia invaded Georgia and it wasn't safe for him to be there. But this whole swashbuckling adventure led to us meeting and falling in love. And literally, just one night around our dining room table, it had been a horrible day at work, and I had a business trip the next day, and I just wanted to have a glass of wine, and I didn't want to open up a bottle. And we started asking ourselves, why were there no great consumer brands in wine? At least ones that didn't feel really relatable for the modern consumer. But there were great brands in spirits and craft beer who just really nailed storytelling. And as wine, we always like to say that like we're the alcohol of storytelling, but we are not really creative in how we do it. We're always telling the same stories over and over again. So we saw this opportunity to build a brand that really borrowed from craft beer and craft spirits to build a character that could unite the world of wine and really act as like an emissary to these different wine growing regions, and then have each one of these varietals be like a postcard from her travels. And of course, the twist to this was that we were not going to put it in a bottle, we were going to put it in a can. And the insight behind that was 97% of wine that's bought and sold in this country is consumed within 72 hours after purchase. And it's less than 2 years old. So if 60% of the industry's carbon footprint came from packaging and supply chain, you have a unique opportunity to drink your way to a cleaner planet and solve a big consumer problem, which is how many people deny themselves that glass of wine because they don't want to waste a bottle.
Yeah, it's a very specific niche and like one that I think happens all the time. I am definitely one of those consumers who, like, if I, in the past have not had someone there to drink a bottle of wine with me, I would not open that bottle. So it's a very specific thing that you were able to identify, which I think is a stroke of brilliance. And there's a lot of strokes of brilliance in this story. So before we get too far and I get carried away down a rabbit hole,
I love a rabbit hole. Let's go.
Exactly. I do want, for listeners who are not as familiar with Archer Roose, let's give them like a walk through what are the key attributes and values of this brand, and what does it do differently to differentiate itself in the marketplace.
Well, at Archer Roose, we're all about popping open the possibilities. And so, what that means is we're about reimagining where and how wine should be so that we make it relevant for the modern consumer and their lifestyle. So, first and foremost, we're not a brand that is built off of geography and variety. So, we are really built off of this character of Archer Roose who travels the world. But what unites our portfolio is a commitment to quality. So at the end of the day, like that glass of wine is a treat and it's got to be delightful and full of enjoyment. So we partnered with the University of Cornell in order to create our own process around canning wine, and to make sure that it could be a true replacement pour. The second piece was all about transparency. We talk about terroir and lots of really sophisticated things in wine. And it's not that the consumer isn't dumb or uneducated, but we can just be so much more inclusive by changing the vocabulary that we use. Because when consumers are shopping today, they're all flipping around the back to look at like the ingredients label. And so let's bring that into wine and let's translate a lot of these concepts into things that consumers are already thinking and talking about. So at Archer Roose, we call this our practice, place, and people behind our wines. And it's printed on the back of every can. And so is our ingredients, which is really key. And the third piece is really about, ensuring that all of the wine that we bring you is low intervention, it's fruit forward, it's dry, it's made from organic grapes. It is, vegan friendly, it's gluten-free, but it's also in this format that fits your lifestyle. So you can just have that single glass, or you can have many glasses if you want. But the other key piece is that you can take Archer Roose on any adventure. So we always like to say that we are best poured into a glass like any glass of wine would be, but you can now have us on a mountaintop or a beach or skiing. We can really go anywhere where you are. And in doing that, our big kind of aha was that as much as we love going out to dinner, to white tablecloths restaurants and having a culinary experience, as wine drinkers, we really wanted our wine to come with us in how we were living and experiencing our lives. But wine was not present, or good wine wasn't present in so many of those occasions. So by actually saying, we don't need to really be that creative. We just need to say, where are we spending our time? Let's make sure that good wine shows up there. And suddenly we could unlock a whole lot of incremental opportunities. And the interesting thing is, while that insight was definitely rooted in anecdotal experience about my life, as we've scaled this company, what we've realized is that so much of the data around young people today and what's happening in this category is a little incomplete because it's being looked at through a lens of how this industry was built and constructed, which was, hey, there's a white tablecloth experience in which you discover a brand. Then you go and you start at an entry price point, and over time you grow and then you build a cellar. And that's kind of the traditional steps of how this industry's been arranged. But due to a whole host of factors, from just macroeconomic pressures to the size of houses that people can afford today, all of that infrastructure is being changed, but people's desire for wine and their interest in it is still there. It's just that now we have to recognize that how they're consuming and where they are spending their dollars and showing up is different. So we got to be where they are.
Exactly. And I think that white tablecloth experience, that is such a small sliver of the marketplace, right? And
correct.
It's just the wine industry in a lot of ways is still thinking from that on-premise first sort of strategy, the fine wine type experience. But that's just such a small sliver. Like now, when you're thinking about how people are finding beverages, and I think this is another stroke of your brilliance, was thinking about the experiences and the places that wine is not. So I know that we're going to dig in more to the arcades and the movie theaters and all of those sorts of places. But, that's the on-premise side. The off-premise side of expanding where people find wine. You really do have to think about it in terms of, hey, someone is at Whole Foods or at, a grocery store, what have you, and they are looking at wine as one of the different types of products that they may want to drink that evening. Not, I am only a wine drinker, and in fact, I'm going to go over to this bottle section and find. That's just not how people find products anymore. They don't segregate by category. So I think that is just such a misnomer that I come up against time and time again.
But the other thing too is that I just don't think it's ever been a realistic way to market, because if we go to think about Europe, right, traditional wine drinking societies like France and Italy, which, when we think about that, that's like the heart of wine, right? And heart of wine culture. But they have aperitivos, they have digestifs. Like, there is really no culture where it's like, I only drink wine. Like, we're all being a little promiscuous. So now what we have to recognize too is that unless it is a wine that is truly meant to be bottled aged, um, for hundreds, thousands of years, wine was in a different format other than a bottle. And so we have to embrace that, not only because it makes sense for the consumer and actually allows us incremental opportunities to bring them to the category, but it also helps our operators increase the profitability of their bottom line. Yeah. And one of the things that I actually love is how many operators have come to us and said, listen, I was really skeptical about shifting to wine in a can for my wine by the glass program, but I've seen the profitability of my program increase 15, 20%, because I don't have waste. I've got that one-to-one inventory management. I have controlled pours. Or that's in more of a traditional setting, but also non-traditional settings. I've increased the profitability of my overall beverage program because I've brought people in, and because I frankly can make more margin selling a glass of wine than I can selling beer. So, and this is like, in the kind of, again, we have to think about, it's not just about our industry. It's how do we stand out in a macroeconomic environment that is tough right now. We've got to listen to not just the end consumer, but our customers, aka our retail partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And before we get off the topic of sort of early days, I do want to hop in a little bit. You mentioned the partnership with Cornell. And I think the number one thing that I hear from other producers as to why they don't want to go in cans is it's just not possible to can good wine. So tell me, what were the insights that you learned from that partnership that helped you either, find wines that would be more suitable to canning, or, talk me through that strategy?
Okay, well, first we've got to shatter some myths, okay? And we got to break some sacred cows. So look, I think we all remember that period in 2018, 2019 when the wine industry was like, guess what? The saviors arrived. It's wine and can. And they weren't wrong, but their execution was wrong. Because what they did was they took wine that essentially they couldn't sell into a bottle, and they just immediately put it into can and they sold it. And, I was canning wine at the time, but we were only we've always just produced our wine for alternative formats. And I knew this was going to be a pretty big disaster. And it kind of turned out to be, because it created, I think, a bit of a hangover for the industry and why there hasn't been more rapid adoption. But the insight kind of came from the craft brewer that I was working with to can our wine. So I learned a lot because so when we were first starting out and first canning wine, we didn't have the option, we didn't have the infrastructure of working with a winery because no winery had canned wine before. And I didn't own my facility. So we actually had to partner with a mobile craft brewer who brought the can into the cannery. And I literally spent 2 days before we started canning asking him, you were here during this transition of bottling beer to canning beer. What were the mistakes that people made? And they were like, well, we didn't think enough about dissolved oxygen. We didn't think enough about, did a beer continue to evolve in the bottle? And did we want to whereas this is going to be hermetically sealed. So what things do we have to control for? So that was the initial first pass at this. And I do credit the fact that through that partnership, we had a 9-month shelf life in our very first year, which is nothing compared to what we have now. But it really helped us avoid a couple of the biggest pitfalls. But the University of Cornell was literally right around the corner from us. And so I figured, hey, let's get this competitive edge, because I truly can't afford to can anything and then have it go bad. So I'm just going to partner with you from the get-go. And we partnered with Gavin Sachs and his team. And we started literally testing our cans from the first run to figure out what we needed to do. And it's been a long process, but essentially what we've done is you have to look at it from there's sort of three different pieces that you have to control for. The first is interventions in the vineyard. And an example of this is like, in organic winemaking, you often use copper as a spray on the vines in order to prevent fungus. But copper is very corrosive to aluminum. So you really have to control for how much parts per million copper is showing up in the wine so that that is not the case. So that's just one
Wow. Yeah.
example of things that we have to think about. The second piece is through the actual like winemaking process. So like we look at a kind of a host of different chemical, like the actual chemistry of the wine to make sure that it is in the best condition possible to be canned. And some things that you don't have to worry about when you're bottling wine, like dissolved oxygen or free SO2, you think about a lot when you can it, because the great opportunity in canning wine is that if you're already drinking young, fresh wine, you can truly bring young, fresh wine to consumers. But you really have to make sure that you've gotten all these pieces right. So that's kind of the second piece. And the third, and this is where actually I think, frankly, the industry struggled the most, which is one piece that until recently you couldn't really control, which is that it's the can liner, the impact that the actual liner has. Even when we started canning wine, we thought that all liners were sort of created equal. If it was made for wine or hard to hold container, this was something that we really focused on with the University of Cornell. But what we learned was that that's not the case, that you really need a specific type of B-Panny acrylic liner that will really help you maximize shelf life. And what I found was that there was actually a lot of canning companies that would claim, and their brokers who worked with them, who would claim that they were giving that to you and actually weren't. And so we learned that you actually had to test to make sure that you got the right liner that you paid for.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is something that we're really passionate about because frankly, and I know it's kind of esoteric, but once we cracked that piece, we unlocked 2-year shelf life.
Wow.
And yeah. And so now we have a 2-year shelf life on all of our products, which changes the game when it comes to wine and spirits distribution, because while beer distribution is really set up for fast turn and higher velocity, wine and spirits isn't really. And so we needed that 2-year shelf life in order to really give our distributors the confidence to get behind our brands. But yeah, that was I'm sorry if that was way too much.
No, that's amazing. And I think that level of specificity is so important because, I think a lot of winemakers I've talked to just throw up their hands and say, oh, it can't be done. And I'm like, I do think that there are ways to do it. And in fact, there are brands that have cracked the code now. So let's, learn from their hard-won insights. So let's just spend a couple more minutes on the early days of Archer Roose. So, how did you fund those the early project, and tell me about the financial hurdles that you had to overcome?
Oh, gosh, this is the part of the interview I want to have a drink while we talk about. So, look, it was hairy. Like I was a young woman who was not from the industry going out and talking about canned wine. Nobody wanted to fund me. Nobody. So essentially what happened was, you know, we worked on this idea while my husband was getting his MBA. And when he graduated, he got a really great job up here in Boston. And I was actually going to go get my MBA. And, instead, I said, look, I really want to start Archer Roose. And so, will you bet on me? And essentially, we took the money that we had saved for me to go to school, and we put it into the business. And that was how we started funding it. And, for 3 years, I was a solo operator. I did everything. I had a couple of interns, but it was pretty gnarly. We made a lot of mistakes. It was a lot of learning on the job. And fundraising was impossible. It was truly impossible in the beginning. And it really wasn't until 2019 when we landed JetBlue that we started to get momentum on the fundraising side, because JetBlue was not only like a big scaling contract, but it was a brand that really gave us legitimacy. And from there, it got easier. It's never easy, to be clear, but it's gotten easier. But when Constellation Brands did come in and invest in us in 2022, they remarked on my cap table, we've never seen a cap table this large. And that was because I took $5, $10, $15,000 checks in order to really figure out how to really scale the business. And those were the checks that were available to me. So it's not a path I would recommend, but like, as I always say to my team, you play the hand that you're dealt, and you just play it to the best of your ability. So that was kind of how we built the business in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, and, I think it's just such a testament to, what you've built. Now the production of Archer Roose is over 100,000 9-liter case equivalents, which, to hear that story from, the launch in the early days in 2014 and like the small checks and then finally getting some of those breakthroughs and then being able to reach a higher scale, it really is a remarkable story, especially, as a woman founder, knowing how terrible the statistics are around investment in women and then also, investment in wine companies. So congratulations on what you have achieved. It really is remarkable.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right. So I do want to dig in a little bit to kind of the path of, when you first launched, and I want to kind of understand what the route to market was. We know now that you've scaled up to a large size, but did you originally have that insight around the kind of gaps in distribution channels? So, I think of the Archer Roose story as, you having really a stroke of brilliance, that there is no good wine at the movie theater. There's no good wine at Dave and Buster arcades or ski resorts. And that really helped propel the brand. But I'm the outsider here. So tell me, like, was that your original kind of plan to go after those types of non-traditional channels, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, well, there's actually one foundational piece we need to lay first, which is that I didn't really understand why there were, like, I live in Boston, so Boston Beer Company, Sam Adams, like, they kind of are the founders of the craft beer movement. And honestly, like, you can't walk into a liquor store or convenience store or a bar and restaurant and not see Sam Adams. That just doesn't exist in the wine space, right? Doesn't exist in the wine space. And the question and the reason for that I always heard was, oh, well, people can't really scale quality. And at a certain point, you tap out. So I really started to dig into that. And I'm answering this part first because it leads to the second piece. Because you have to figure out how we're going to scale and still maintain that great glass of wine in order to unlock everything that comes after. And what I hit upon was that the challenge was that you would build these wineries, and the relationship was always between the variety and the geography. And then at a certain point, essentially, like, you kind of maxed out on the marketability of the SKUs that you could make and on like how many grapes that you could produce in a particular area. And so what we did was we created this global model that allowed us to focus on a variety essentially per winemaker and per production center, so that we could maintain that emphasis on the quality as we scaled. And then the second part became, how do we show up everywhere where our consumer is? That was always the goal. Like, how do we build a craft wine brand, where you have quality, but you do have scale of distribution? But where to show up? Didn't really click in my mind until we actually launched with a wine distributor. So a wine distributor gave us a break in New York, and they were only putting me in retail settings. And I kept saying, like, well, yeah, but like, the only way someone's ever going to try my brand is if I do a tasting in that store. Like, I want to be at this bar and I want to be, ice skating in Woolman Rink and then have you walk into that retail setting. And they were like, well, we don't service those accounts. And then I was very lucky and I met Union Beer, my beer distributor in New York, and they were like, we're looking at declining beer volumes and we're trying to figure out a way to maximize our gross profit. We're interested in wine, but like, we don't really see how that makes sense with our existing business model. And I was like, well, you know how to sell a can. And frankly, I want to be in every account that you're already selling craft beer. And quite frankly, I really want to be in the on-premise accounts because otherwise my cans of wine are just going to sit on a shelf and gather dust. And at first they were like kind of skeptical. But pretty soon they just kind of got right on board. And after my first year, I quadrupled my sales from my wine distributor. And we've had strong double or triple digit growth in that market ever since. So to me, that's really demonstrated that, again, what we have to recognize here is that as we grapple, what we're dealing with here is not a simple, oh my gosh, people don't want to drink anymore. It's that how people are drinking and where they're drinking has changed. And this is an industry of infrastructure. And we've built infrastructures to deliver and meet certain market demands. But we have to think about how we change those pieces. Because if we do, there is a ton of growth.
So, and a lot of that challenge has to do with format. So we've got keg, bag and box, and can, and a lot of those just have not traditionally been available in these venues where beer distributors, for example, are selling their products. So tell me, how many formats is Archer Roose available in right now?
So right now we're only available in 2. We do kegs and cans.
Okay, great. And how much of the business is cans versus kegs?
90% of the business is cans.
Okay, great. And walk me through now, what is the full product line? Like, how many SKUs do you have? What are the best-selling SKUs?
Yeah, so we have 7 SKUs, and there isn't a dog in the bunch. So bubbly, which is a Prosecco style wine from Veneto, Italy. Bubbly Rosé from Veneto, Italy. Sauvignon Blanc from Casablanca, Chile. Pinot Grigio from Friuli, Italy. Rosé from Provence, France. Pinot Noir from Victoria, Australia. And Malbec from Mendoza, Argentina. And I was just having this conversation with our ops people because I'm kind of a SKU disciplinarian in a lot of ways. Like there's a lot of really high selling SKUs that you'll see are not in our portfolio, and we can talk about why that is. But none of our SKUs really perform badly. They're all kind of pretty much in the middle. But I would say that our 2 top selling SKUs are our bubbly or our Prosecco and our Sauvignon Blanc, which just kills it. And that Sauvignon Blanc SKU is up 80% year over year.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So tell me a little bit about the sourcing. So the sourcing, I know, this is not wine that you're getting off the bulk market. These are very specific winemakers that you work with, that you have researched as up and coming winemakers in their regions. You've developed partnerships with them. Tell me about that model.
Yeah. So, well, first, it actually starts with the University of Cornell, right? So we've developed these SOPs, and we've actually now got enough research that we can, depending on the style of wine, meaning like white or red or even the variety, we understand generally like what are kind of the like metrics that we're looking for in wines. Then we actually look at the variety we want to produce and the geography we want it to be from. We go and we find a winemaker, and then we actually work with him or her kind of from start to end. So one, we're doing an assessment to make sure that the vineyard and the winery itself kind of adheres to our value set. So like it's a sustainable production, carbon neutral, low intervention style, that there is good labor practices that are happening. Then we talk to them about like where we're gonna what grapes are going to be sourced, how, depending on the quantity, if it has to be sourced from multiple vineyards, then like what are the characteristics we're going to look for in order to ensure that we get the right style of wine that we want. And all of our wines are, dry, fruit forward, and very like, they're kind of glue wines is sort of how we joke. We like to call them. So so that's kind of what we do. So then we build this partnership. They have all of our SOPs. We make the wine usually within 20 miles of where the grapes are sourced from. And then we get sent essentially like what's the chemical breakdown of the wine itself. Then it's shipped in a 24,000 liter flexi to California. We actually run another set of labs on it to make sure that it's consistent. And then we package it. So we are quite involved, and we have a fabulous global winemaker, Megan Brody, for our team, whose job it is to manage all of our winemakers and ensure that they're following this process and that everything is within spec.
Wow. I mean, that really is, pretty in depth. I think there's probably a misconception out there among some people that like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of brands and Archer Roose, maybe they're one of them that is just like sourcing on the bulk market. But this is in fact very in depth, deep connection and process, and a high touch process. I mean, it's really interesting to me how, talk me up through the composition of the team. How many people are working for you these days?
Yeah, we have about 23, 24 people working at Archer Roose these days. As I just described, we have a pretty complicated supply chain. So, and production process. So we have, this global head of winemaking. We also have our COO, and then we have our amazing director of operations and supply chain. And underneath her, we have somebody who's really focused on procurement and warehouse management. We've got a great marketing team because, frankly, this is where I think the wine industry really needs to just up our game overall. Is like we need to borrow. Like, look at what 20 years ago, people thought that only grandpas drank brown spirits, right? And now, like with great marketing, whiskey is just brown spirits continue to dominate, right, in the United States, and young people are drinking them. So we have a fabulous marketing team that focuses not just on brand, but also on performance marketing and trade marketing. Because today you really have to be omnichannel in order to compete and build mind share. And then we've got our sales team. So this is actually something I'm really passionate about, which is that there is this common misbelief in the wine industry and in the spirits industry that all distribution is good distribution. I do not believe that at all. I don't believe that. I don't think that and I also don't always want to be in the same accounts that everybody wants to be in. We have a very defined playbook about where we want to show up, and that's the distribution I want to go out and get. The other thing about our sales team that I think is rather unique is that I think, if you look at the tech industry, those sales teams, they recognize that there are different parts of the funnel in a sales process, and they have different types of people that service different parts of it. There's business development, right, who are going out and hunting new accounts. There is key account management, so taking your existing accounts and continuing to grow it, right? Whereas like in the wine industry, everybody's expected to do everything. Oh, and on top of that, they have to manage the distributor tier. So we've actually kind of created a new model where we have regional directors that focus on kind of, broken up the country into 6 different regions. Within each region, there's either 1 to 2 tier 1 markets. And that regional director is responsible for driving new business within that region and then really owning the wholesaler in that one market. Then we have, a bunch of contractors and marketing agencies that help us do activations and sampling in market. And we also have national accounts people who are also responsible for driving new business and then maintaining that business. And then we have somebody whose sole job it is to focus on the non-tier 1 wholesalers and to make sure that pricing is right, incentives are right, like stay on top of all of that administrative detail that often takes you away from selling. Because the goal here is that if you're a salesperson at Archer Roose, you are laser focused on driving new business among accounts that fit within our playbook.
Yeah. And do you find that you are partnering with different types of distributors, like really across the country? I mean, is it beer in some markets, wine and spirits in others, or is there beer and wine and spirits? You know, what does the composition and sort of patchwork of that look like?
Yeah. So this is where like everybody always wants to shoot me because of how complicated I've made this. But yes, we have a different approach depending on the market. So independent markets, we tend to be partnered with beer distributors. Chain driven markets, we tend to partner with wine and spirits wholesalers because they are the category managers for chains. And so what we found was that we couldn't really get traction with national account buyers unless we were partnered with those wine and spirits wholesalers. So it's a mixed bag. And they each do different things well.
Yeah. All right. So, since 2021, your production has tripled. And I know that in the first quarter of this year, when everyone else was seeing contraction, Archer Roose's on premise depletions grew more than 26%, which is a remarkable result in the current market that we're seeing. So, talk me through, how was it that you identified those gaps in the non-traditional on-premise, and like how have you built them over time? Like, what insights would you say helped you build those channels?
Yeah, I mean, I guess becoming a parent means that I don't really have as much control over where I spend my time. Um, and I think I just started looking around a lot more, like going to a party at Dave and Buster's for my kids' class, or like going ice skating with my kids and realizing like, okay, my options if I would like to have a drink is beer or like a vodka soda. Like I'm a wine drinker. Like why doesn't wine sell here? And of course they might all have wine options, but they're not they weren't quality options. They weren't wines that fit with my values. And like I looked around at these birthday parties and like these were birthday parties where like, nobody has red dye. These are people who are like not letting their kids have corn syrup and all this stuff. And so it fits into this wider trend of like Americans are increasingly aware of what they're putting in their bodies. And it's not that we look to alcohol to be a healthy option, but like we want it to be reflective of everything else that we're putting in our bodies. And so I just realized there was this massive untapped market. And that our format allowed us uniquely to play in it, because it's not enough just to have a great option or they would all serve Dom Perignon by the glass, right? It has to be affordable. And the reality is that like these types of accounts tend to have incredible variability throughout the week in terms of traffic. They tend to have, they're not going to have very well trained hospitality people. So things around controlled pour, inventory management, one-to-one inventory management really mattered and could make a difference. And so like we went in and basically would say like, listen, this is just about increasing the profitability of your program. And why don't we just do a test over a weekend and you can look at how much money you made. And if this makes sense, then we can talk about our bigger partnership. And time again, they came back to us. And the biggest piece of feedback wasn't like, oh, we've been waiting just for canned wine our whole life. But like, though that was part of it, like, oh my goodness, we didn't realize how receptive people would be to canned wine, because that's the other thing that I think as an industry we don't realize is like we have a lot of ingrained prejudice and bias as the gatekeepers in this industry that doesn't carry over to the general public. But also that like just the quality of the wine set it apart. So like I couldn't comfortably stand by this and say like, yes, I'm serving you Sauvignon Blanc from a can. And even if somebody was a little skeptical, they would try it and be like, no, this is great. Thank you. And that's just proved really well. And it's been a ground game, like it's a grind for sure. But now we have a whole host of case studies. So when we go in and we pitch this, we've got real numbers to back this up. And in some cases, we're not even saying, hey, kick out this other less quality wine. We're saying just offer us alongside it. And we often see that we outsell that option 5-1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what else do you know about your customer? Tell me about the audience. I know that there are lots of moms in my demographic who would love to sip Archer Roose, at the Chuck E. Cheese, because that's where we find ourselves. But tell me about the broader audience that you see purchasing the product.
Yeah. So, okay, first of all, there's two pieces there. So, one is our core demographic is women between the ages of 28 and 50. She is there. She tends to be, either urban or metro area centric, and is a wine drinker. Identifies herself as a wine drinker. Tends to be people who work out, or at least aspire to work out. I would fall into the aspire to work out category. And is looking at ingredients when they shop for themselves and for their family, and that kind of extends itself into the wine that they drink. They tend to, like, our initial customer tends to identify like wine as their primary drink of choice, and so a lot of this is just about unlocking opportunities for them. So that's our core consumer. But what we've actually found out is, like, now who beyond that buys us. And if you look at our D2C business, 40% of our D2C are men between the ages of 35 and 55. Many of them actually identify as wine collectors, who just want to have a glass of wine, or want to have wine for their boats or their golf game. And we also see a really strong 65 and over ordering. So that's even like baby boomers, who are, the backbone of this industry, are still really interested in exploration, particularly as they enter a new phase in their life, which is more socially oriented in retirement. So it's been really interesting seeing the flexibility of this product in terms of the applicability. But we are still really focused on that core consumer, because I do think she's very overlooked. I mean, for additional context here, as grocery distribution becomes more and more important to this industry, you have to keep in mind that women are the primary shoppers for their family, and they're also completely ignored by the wine industry traditionally.
Yeah.
Yes, some people have launched mommy juice or jewel box wine or some other things that are extremely condescending and are not something that any of us would ever get. And for me, there was this real aha moment actually watching a Father's Day promotion of Aviation Gin by Ryan Reynolds that was funny and witty and cool. And I was like, why can't moms have something like that?
Yeah.
We're people too.
Totally. Well, I feel like that naturally takes us to the partnership with Elizabeth Banks. So tell me how that came about.
Yeah, so that came about during the pandemic. We, have always been more on-premise heavy. And so we were really rebuilding our business and wanting to launch D2C. And I had, in the back of my mind, had always had this secret aspiration to reach out to her, because I'm such a fan. And frankly, our brand is a little complicated in the fact that we're irreverent and we're funny, but we're also sophisticated, because wine is inherently sophisticated, but we're about making a kind of complicated product more accessible. And so I've always loved her work because, she looks like Grace Kelly, but she's got Lucille Ball sensibility. And frankly, she's kind of like that big sister that you just want to have a glass of wine with and be like, tell me all your secrets. And so during the pandemic, I reached out to her and her team and was just like, I know this sounds crazy, but I have a canned wine company and I think you'd be perfect for it. And we're going to build a very unique type of celebrity partnership in wine, one that hasn't existed before. You are going to really get an opportunity to market to people differently and harness your unique voice. And I didn't, it was kind of a long process of getting to know one another, because who's this crazy lady who's reaching out to me during the pandemic? But then she called me while she was floating down a river in Utah, and she was like, I get it, man. I am so canned wine. Let's go and do this. And she's been a fabulous business partner ever since. And what I credit with her is she's one of the most busy people in Hollywood, period. I mean, she produces, she writes, she directs, and she stars in a host of things. She's currently on location right now, but she always makes time for us. She really gets what it takes to move the needle. And she's also the one who always says to me, we have to remember who this is about. Like, there is a lot this industry can be quite insular, and we can often fall into a trap of like marketing to ourselves because it's really nice reinforcement. But she's the one that really makes me stay true to like our end consumer, because that's where we win and that's how we win.
Yeah. Well, tell me about building that DTC business and the social footprint online. I mean, it looks from all accounts like it was really worthwhile to, enter into this partnership, and she's not just kind of a spokesperson. She's also an actual partner in the brand and also the chief creative officer. So tell me about, how did that partnership roll out, and like what is working in terms of, her platform and being able to help build Archer Roose platform?
Yeah. All right. Well, there's kind of a few pieces to this, right? So first and foremost, like, I think 5 or 6 years ago, it was all about follower count. And now I would say it's all about engagement and impressions, and the quality of those impressions. And this is where what I think that Elizabeth is just really good at, which is we have to create content that entertains. And in entertaining, we can educate, but it's got to be entertaining first, because people come to these platforms for an escape. And so we've really leaned into that. And we've done a lot of like testing. Like we do some really beautiful high production pieces, and we do some that are like, just shot on an iPhone, that are like a little scrappier. And it really, they both perform well. So much of it comes into like the content and the zeitgeist and how do you stay flexible and nimble. But where I think her secret sauce is when we create things that are really specific to a partnership that we're doing. So for instance, JetBlue, when we relaunched with them after the pandemic in 2023, we actually ran commercials in the back of the seat during takeoff so that you could be introduced to Archer Roose, and then the flight attendant would come down and offer you an opportunity to buy. And that was just incredibly impactful, because when we look at the size of like that contract, it was originally slated to be about 25,000 cases in 2023, and we sell them 70,000 cases a year now. Wow. And that's just, I think, from, they learned about the brand, they understand the value prop, and we built that trust with the consumer in that type of captive setting. And that's just where Elizabeth has a unique superpower that we can deploy in order to build that kind of awareness and relationship.
Yeah. All right. So thinking about the whole journey. So now you have been at the Archer Roose wine brand building game for a decade now. What would you say were the key challenges along the way in scaling up to where you are now at around 100,000 cases?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like the first one was prejudice, like just a real reluctance. It was funny because when we launched, the wine industry was actually talking about a lot of the things it's still talking about, but it only wanted solutions that fit into this narrow worldview of how they were already doing business. And so while I was developing like proof of concepts and still am developing proof of concepts, I still hear a lot of like, well, you're a fad. And I'm like, I've been doing this for a decade, and, we haven't handed down here yet. So like, I don't, that's not a fad. Like, this is here to stay. This is the future of the industry that you're looking at right here. So prejudice, I'd say, is the biggest one. The second thing is like, we talk a lot about doing business differently here, where like there is something that sort of has worked a kind of a wash and repeat for the industry for a long time. And we have to like be brave and think of new ways to go about it. An example of this was just being a wine distributor that was willing to partner with beer distributors, period. Um, and that's a challenge though, because it's not like I all of a sudden called up Union Beer and like we sailed off into the sunset together. Like their management had to be convinced that this was worth the investment of their people's time, that the gross profit was there, that the velocity would come. And we had to get beer sales guys competent selling wine. And that's not easy either. But that took time. And this is sort of what you have to recognize whenever you do something differently. It's not going to be perfect overnight. Um, so that I think is the second biggest challenge. And the third, I mean, look, like I've been doing this long enough that like this is my second round of Trump tariffs that we're dealing with. Like I've had supply chain disruptions due to wars. We've had banking crises. We've had inflationary environments. We've had aluminum shortages. Not to mention just like, no business runs perfectly and you don't make decisions perfectly as a leader every day. But like, so there's just this ongoing challenge of all the things that you can't control all the time. But that's where I just remind myself that we just got to chop the wood in front of us and eventually we'll have a log cabin.
Yeah, yeah. And what advice do you have for other founders who are maybe just, early in their journey, just trying to get that brand off the ground? If you have any advice for them, I'm sure they would love to hear it.
So my advice from my own personal experience is like wait to quit your day job as long as possible. That steady paycheck is awesome. And hold on to it as long as you can. Get a really good lawyer and recognize that product quality is table stakes, but you have to have a plan for marketing and distribution. Otherwise, none of it matters.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, and what I've been hearing from this entire conversation is how data driven you are. And a lot of the decisions that you've made and a lot of the proposals that you've made, for example, going to on premise accounts and telling them, let's do a test over a weekend, or, talking to Union Beer about how you can help them improve their overall revenue, right? Like, these sorts of these are not like kind of soft, unclear measures. Like, you are going in with hard metrics, hard numbers, and saying, let's look at this in a quantifiable way. Let's understand what the opportunity is here, and we can test the thing. Like, I think that is such a smart approach to be able to just, instead of saying like, hey, why don't you try this thing? It's that you're saying, hey, here is something that we can test over a limited time to understand it if it is really going to move volume or dollars or whatever it is. So I think that approach is another takeaway that I'm already having from our conversation. And just wrapping up here, I do want to hear just a little bit about the rest of 2025. I had seen an earlier prediction that you were, predicting doubling your volumes in 2025. But now we have tariffs to contend with. Tell me what you're thinking about for the rest of the horizon line here for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a crystal ball, so who knows? But we're still going to double this year. I mean, we just have a lot turning on, and we're monitoring the situation. I mean, I think we're very lucky in that we have a real dedication to quality, but we have also been marching towards strong margins so that we can take some hits. And that's because I have been in situations when I've had slim margins and taken hits and it's almost bankrupted us. And so we needed to be prepared for what comes out. And so we'll get through this. I mean, one thing that I feel very strongly about is that, you know, the trends around what wine drinkers are interested in today, which is they want to continue to explore international wines. They want to explore the world of wines. Like Archer Roose is absolutely open to launching domestic SKUs, but this category, meaning the wine category, will only prosper if we keep what consumers want in mind, and we have to get creative about how we bring them what they want. So my commitment is to bringing consumers what they want, and we just now have to figure out how to continue to do that in this environment. We've got amazing new accounts coming on that I wish I could tease you about, but my CMO will kill me. But like we still believe very strongly in the future of the wine industry. And I truly believe that the future of the everyday drinking wine is can. So, yeah, watch out, world. We're coming for you.
I love it. All right. Well, last question. So, a drinks entrepreneur asks you for a book or a movie or an industry group or person to follow. What or who do you recommend to provide the greatest insight?
Ooh, great question. I love the podcast Business Wars, and they have ones on like Gallo and Bacardi and the big beer companies. And I think there's so much to learn in those companies' histories, so much context to understand why decisions are made and how they're made. So I would absolutely recommend that. I would also recommend the book Seven Drinks That Changed History, because I think that really is a reminder that once you strip out all marketing, like alcohol is about human connection. And so, like, what are the different things that have motivated us? I mean, you have to recognize like civilization exists because of wine. Like, people figured out that fermenting grapes would, give them a nice buzz. And so they created agriculture to continue that on. So, like, this has always been about how do we feel closer to one another? And we have to remind ourselves that right now. So those would, I think, be my two big
Yes,
recommendations.
important takeaways and a perfect place to end. So, Marian, thank you so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hello and welcome back. I'm here with Erica and Caroline, and today we are looking at seasonal or occasion-based selling. This is when a particular product or category is pushed in conjunction with anything from a holiday to a season to even a particular day. So examples might be the spike that we see in March for Irish whiskey around St. Patrick's Day, or Mexican spirits benefiting from that Cinco de Mayo bump. It could extend to longer forms, full on months or seasons like rosé in the summer and spring, or dry January and sober October. So, is this a good thing, a bad thing, a necessary evil, as it were? Erica, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, you have to follow the money. And there's no question that, we're going to see 4th of July be a peak for RTDs like High Noon. Or, at on premise venues, we're just going to see massive sales driven on some of the biggest days of the year. Halloween being one of those days for huge sales at on-premise venues the day before Thanksgiving. Uh, all any of these types of theme days where people associate them with going out, we're just going to see a lot of volume. And that type of behavior, like, I think, it's the responsible thing for brands to plan around that and build their campaigns when you know that you have an audience for those products. So, brands planning for Negroni Week, or, Aperol spritzes in the summer, like those sorts of campaigns and time-based promotions, they really do work in the consumer landscape. So I think it's I wouldn't even call it a necessary evil. I'd say that it's something that helps brands find a cultural moment in the consumer landscape where they can resonate with people effectively, and they know people are going to be receptive to their message and to their product.
I might call it a necessary evil. But it is necessary. And what it reminds me of are the articles that we start to see around all these holidays about, here's the 10 wines that you should pair with turkey this Thanksgiving, and Valentine's Day pairings, and these types of things. Like, they need to happen. Those are probably some of the highest traffic, reads of the year for a lot of these sites. And I think it's the same for brands. My only thought or consideration is, like, make sure it fits. Don't just try to latch on to any holiday or anything happening. Obviously, people building brands are aware of that. But if you want to be in the mainstream, you have to participate in what is happening in the mainstream. If you want to be a more edgy brand, maybe you find something along the edges to tack yourself to, and you don't go for the main holidays. But I think it's got to be done. It gives people a nice occasion, and it's just something fun to partake in.
Absolutely. Here I'd urge brands to consider that the health of the brand or the category shouldn't be reliant on a singular time of the year, right? Those wine brands that sell rosé that are most successful have, appealed to consumers outside just the warmer months. Tequilas that have grown year over year over year aren't just relying on National Margarita Day, which I think oddly, is sometime in early February, no time near Cinco de Mayo, right? So you want to tap into these moments because they are easily accessible to consumers. It allows them to participate with friends and build community, but you want to do it in, dare I say, finger quote, an authentic way, at least a way that seems natural and not forced.
Couldn't agree more.
And to that end, right, a hot tip for any brand is making sure you're planning in advance. It's when you're playing catch up and looking at what's happening next week or next month that, you are kind of forcing the moment rather than really coming to it as prepared as possible.
Yeah, plan a year ahead, 6 to 9 months at the very latest, because any of those partnerships are going to fill up fast.
And with that, that concludes our last call. I want to thank you for joining us on Business of Drinks. Please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you listen to us on, and make sure to tap that notification button so that you are informed of the latest release of any episode. Help us spread the word and click those star ratings, 5 stars, please, and share us on social media. It really does help us find new listeners and grow our audience. Finally, if there's a topic you'd like us to cover on the podcast, please tell us. You can reach us at podcast@businessofdrinks.com or reach out via Instagram or LinkedIn. We want to hear from you, and we really do respond to all our messages. See you next time.